Hello, and welcome to the Medical Device Innovators podcast. I have with me today Mark Slack. Dr. Slack is the Chief Medical Officer for Cambridge Medical Robotics and an associate professor, or is that,
yes,
is that correct?
Professor.
Associate professor with the University of Cambridge. And he has a very unique view of the development of medical devices, as he's been involved with CMR from the beginning, listed as a co-founder as well. So I guess to start with, let's start with your background and how you ended up in this type of position.
Sure. So I qualified as a doctor in South Africa, and then specialized as a gynecologist, or as in the States, an OBGYN. And which I practiced at clinically. I was head of gynecology at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, which is the university's teaching hospital, where I practiced for many years. During the course of my career, I also did a couple of other inventions, some of which I took to global launch with major pharmaceutical companies. And then I taught minimal access surgery and got concerned that I couldn't teach everybody to do it to the standard that I thought they should do it at, because of the inherent difficulties with standard keyhole or, straight stick minimal access surgery. So that's when I started contemplating robotics. But I didn't like what I saw that was available. I spoke to a lot of doctors, and we thought that might be too big. Too difficult. So we set about, myself and my co-founders, that could we design a robot that was slightly different from what was available, that would better serve our needs. And that's how it all started. And if I knew then what I know now, I probably wouldn't have started.
Well, we'll certainly dive into that and the lessons learned as we go through all of this. But to start with, so the robotic system is called Versius, and can you tell us a little bit about where it's at and
sure.
the standout features?
The big thing is we always ask people if they have classical education, do they know where the name comes from? And of course, it doesn't come from anywhere. We just made it up, and it sounds a bit sort of academic, Versius on the end. But anyway, it's a name we made up roughly to mean versatile. And what we set out was to make a physically small robot. That was modular, that would enable us to do the procedures in the way that doctors would do them with normal straight stick laparoscopy, similar port positions, similar steps, and so on. So that's what we set out to do. We started in 2014, and we did first in human in 2019. And we progressed, and so that was relatively simple operations. We did a couple of small procedures. And then we proceeded to expand our indications. We've now done over 8,000 cases, ranging in everything from the head and neck, through the chest, down into the abdomen and the pelvis. So we're covering all the specialties now with the robot. Lots still to do and learn, but so far, a good start.
And it sounds like from following the LinkedIn page for CMR, it sounds like this is pretty much a worldwide deployment at this point. Is that the case?
Correct. So we started in India. We have a very good colleague who runs our Indian office, who has extensive medtech experience, and he was quite keen that we started there. We also worked with the most outstanding surgeons in some of the better hospitals I've ever come across, and we were able to do and studies quite quickly in really competent, in really good hospitals, really competent surgeons who really were skilled. And we started there, but we've spread from India. We have systems in Pakistan, Egypt, Dubai, Australia, most of Europe, Spain, France, Germany, Italy. We're going to the Nordic companies at the moment, and quite a number in Eastern Europe. We've also expanded to South America and South Africa, and next stop, the United States of America.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, I've certainly started to see some some of the buzz starting to happen here in the US as well. So it's been great to see. So what is it that really makes Versius stand out versus other robotic platforms?
Yeah, so I think there is a fundamental difference. And when you look at pictures or you see it, it all revolves around the wrist on the arm of the robot. It's called a V-wrist. And because of its architecture, it allows us to hold our instruments end on as a human would hold an instrument. Most, if not all, the other robots are on a rail, and they clutch their instruments almost like a person would hold a dagger. And that means in order to get the reach and the range that they need to be very, very much bigger. So by that architectural difference, we get a small robot. Ours is completely modular. All the arms are separate from each other. And then the surgeon sits at an open console. They have a screen in front of them. They can be seated or standing for that matter, depending on preference. And in a very neutral position, their arms resting on a bar, and they do the operation. So being that architecture and open, they can communicate with the anesthetists, with the scrub sisters. And we just think it's a better platform. So it's quick to set up. Goodness, you can get it up and ready in minutes, literally, and you can pack it away in minutes as well. And it doesn't require any architectural changes to the theater. You don't have to reinforce the floors or open doors or anything. It just gets moved in and out. So we think, so that wrist, the way it holds the instrument are really the principal differences, which then allow all the other differentiators, the ability to go through smaller ports, smaller instruments, etc. So very different from the other robots on the market.
So the feedback that you get from surgeons that use this for the first time, is there a common theme that you hear from them?
They are the best thing to see is when they come to see it for the first time and they walk into the theater. We have demo theaters obviously in our offices, and they walk in and they go, wow, it's so small. And it is so different from all the other offerings that are out there. And so that's their first reaction. Then the second one, they find the console really comfortable to sit at and they can talk openly. And then of course the third bit is they can put their ports where they would normally put them for the operation they were doing laparoscopically, and they can replicate the steps that they normally do. So that's the one really, really wow moment that we see. The other one is they realize they can do what they call a hybrid procedure. So the easy steps they might want to do with straight stick laparoscopy, and then the more intricate, the more delicate, like the suturing, the deep cavities, they may swap onto the robot. And that gives flexibility, which allows speed, reducing cost, etc. So it gives them an enormous freedom to operate, all with one aim, that what's best for the patient. Same operation done slightly more efficiently, slightly better results than normal straight stick.
The first time I ran across the Versius system, what really stood out for me is how it seemed to be designed from the beginning to work alongside the surgical staff, as opposed to being a robot that needed its own space and that you weren't right next to, but it was really designed so not to replace everyone in the surgical theater, but to really work alongside them.
Absolutely. That's exactly what the whole idea was. We wanted it to fit into the workflow of the theater and not have the workflow of the theater fit around it. So you can move it through the normal doors. If you're not using it, you can fold it down and stand it against the wall, and your theater is still usable. And when you are using it, it takes out, the footprint is each arm is only 38 by 38 centimeters. And the arm of the robot is almost identical to a human arm. It's got a shoulder, it's got an elbow and a wrist, and it's about the same length as the arm of an adult male. And so it helps them fit around, and an assistant can stand right next to it because of the V-wrist and what we call collaborative robotics. the arms don't fly about the place. There's no fast movement, so there's no danger to the assistant staff, and they can stand right next to it. And in fact, if they want to get closer, they can move the arm slightly out of the way, and the surgeon won't even realize that the shoulder or the elbow has been moved, because the instrument is held in its position still. So very much designed by surgeons, and engineers for surgeons, in order to replicate surgery that is done well, keyhole.
Very nice. Okay. So as we get into more of the development side of this, and to those lessons that result in your earlier statement about maybe not going down this path if you'd known the extent of it to start with, what sort of guiding principles did you have as you've worked from the beginning and the concept of this through now clinical use? What are kind of the main pieces that you didn't want to lose track of along the way?
Well, I think what's important to say is in a med tech industry, the most important individual or person in the equation is the stakeholder, which is the patient. And in this situation, the stakeholder counts more than the shareholder. You've got to design it for safe use in a patient. And one of our abiding principles was, I've been involved in lots of medtech innovation, and I've also watched from the periphery some of the disasters that have evolved over the years. And one of the ones that springs to mind is the mesh debacle, which I was very involved in as an expert on implantable plastics, and had warned that this may well become an issue. And when we set out the company, what we set out as founders was we said we wanted to prove that you could make a profitable business ethically, and therefore underpinning everything we've done was patient safety. So obviously there's the huge engineering challenge, and that was considerable. But we had, my co-founders, brilliant engineers, and we hired a team of very brilliant engineers as well. And we work with people around the world like yourself to actually refine products and get expertise wherever it is available. And then we, so the actual engineering product was very sophisticated, and we've done well. But around that, we built this. So we followed a process called IDEAL. So this is an academic collaboration that started between Oxford University in the UK and Weill Cornell in the States. And it's a way of introducing complex products to clinical practice ethically and safely. And we followed the IDEAL process from day zero. So we started, once we'd built the robot and we wanted to start, we did more than 350 cadaver studies, making sure. So by the time we got to a living human, we knew exactly where to put our ports. We knew exactly how the instruments would go in. We knew exactly what steps we would follow. And so it was just translating into a live patient. And even then, you start with a tiny study, stop after a few, analyze what's gone on, what went well, what went badly. And then we progress through to bigger studies. And then finally, we have what we call a registry. So we have over 8,000 patients on that. And so all along the way, underpinning whatever we did was patient safety. And could we do it well? Are our results good? Does it justify ongoing with that? And I think that's been, we've put the strong ethical, and all our team, our engineers, everybody I work with, all subscribe to this ethos that this is about doing something safely and well and not putting patients at risk. And I think that's been the exciting bit. Gosh, it's a lot of work though. I mean, it's you just don't anticipate the complexities, and each little thing comes with a whole set of changes. And then of course, the thing that will be close to your heart as well is instruments. Building an instrument with an articulated wrist, that's no small undertaking. That's no small undertaking. And I think we were, it's good to be a bit naive, and it's good to be a bit confident, but we have had to go out, get expertise to come in and say, guys, you could do this better or that better, and this could be improved. And and it's a process, and it's not finished yet, Harlan. We're still very much working on improving everything we can.
Oh, fantastic. So your team that you've referenced, in the time that I've known CMR, it's grown exponentially, I would say, from one building the first time I visited to, probably, gosh, I think at this point there's a new manufacturing facility that's even outside of the brand new building that was built for the technical development, I think. How do you manage that growth while still keeping in mind, the patient safety and the other guiding principles that you really want to run the company on?
Yeah, I mean, the growth has been exponential. If you think there were 5 of us in 2014, and there's over 1,000 now, and that's fast growth, and a lot of them very, very highly qualified technical people. And of course, we've grown the clinical side, and we've grown the commercial and marketing side as well. And yes, it's and I think again, we've all managed to stick, and we've employed people, and we impress on them that we're here to do something medically good. We want to, my big bugbear, Arlen, was that minimal access surgery, the question you've got to say to yourself, is it better than open surgery? Is the keyhole approach better than doing the big cut? And oh boy, it is. And I can show you thousands of papers showing, less pain, less wound infections, less incisional hernias. And in fact, it reduces all complications by about 50%. And yet, despite that, in the United States, which is the most sophisticated health service in the world, less than 50% of people get keyhole surgery. And the reason being, it's bloody difficult. It's technically very, very difficult to do. It's tiring. It's physically a strain. And some surgeons just never quite get that skill. And that's why we started wanting to build the robot, saying, keyhole's got so many advantages, yet people still aren't getting it. So what could we do to help get more keyhole surgery? And that was, to build the robot. Then I looked with doctors at the robots on the market, and we thought, well, they've only penetrated 3-4% of the minimal access market. So it can't necessarily be the best robot for the job. You would have expected a better penetration at that stage. So that's why we went to try and build our own, looking at the features that we thought would encourage better uptake. And so the overriding principle has been to increase the uptake of keyhole surgery. And, the whole company, from the chaps at the front desk to the, senior engineers and so on, they all agree with this. So they're all there to try and fulfill this dream. So a lot of people are working more on a mission than just doing a job. And I think that's kept the ethos of the company. That's kept the motive and the drive. And in fact, as my engineers, the biggest problem is that they are almost too cautious. I always tell the joke of, in the beginning, one of the engineers said to me, the tip of the instrument's capable of 2 millimeters of unintended motion. And I said, yeah, but a human doctor is capable of 18 centimeters of unintended motion. So, we've had engineers driving the safety, and we've almost over-engineered parts of it as a result. So I think, good safety culture, a culture of trying to do something to make people better. We have a lot of people, I think, could make more money elsewhere, but they like the mission that we're on. I think that's probably the right term.
And keeping the patient safety at the forefront of that is...
Well, not to transgress into another area, but the vaginal mesh story and the mesh implant story that we saw hit the world over the last sort of 10 or so years, we should have all known it was going to happen, because there was historical literature pointing to the complications of that sort of implant. And a lot of companies just didn't do the homework to work out what was good, bad, or indifferent. And I had a lot of work to do as an expert witness in those cases and so on. And so when we started this, I said to the guys, at every stage, there must be no guessing. We really have to put safety right at the top. And I have this registry is a wonderful implementation. So every single case that's operated and goes into a registry. And if we get complications, then they're reviewed. So I've got a couple of very senior surgeons from the United States, 1 or 2 from Europe, and they will assess each case that's had a complication and say, is it normal for that type of operation? Does it look like there's been any surgical misdemeanor, and is it in any way related to the robot? And so at every point, we know exactly what's going on. And of course, we're evaluating any malfunction all the time to make sure that we engineer it to the highest possible standard. And the reassurance is I know what my results are on my registry, and I can compare it to historical controls. So I can tell you that right now we are totally safe. And I can sleep soundly at night because I know we're not doing anything when the machine's not doing anything that will in any way threaten the patient's health.
So you feel like your experience with the mesh issues really did inform the culture that you're trying to
yes,
create at CMR?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I'm really honest, I was quite horrified by what I saw. There was an industry splurge. One company brought an operation out that sold very, very well. All the others then thought, wow, they're making a lot of money. So they would sort of get their mesh off the shelf and try it the same. And, the meshes were all the same plastic. Most of them were polypropylene. But that's not what denotes how they behave in the body. It's the way they're woven. And of course, there were vast differences in the way they're woven. And we did some research here in Cambridge and classified them. And we could classify them into 6 types. And type 1 was compatible with implantation. Types 2 to 6 weren't and should never have been put in the human body. So you look at that and you think, and there've been other ones. There've been, there was a scandal around metal on metal hips, where both the cup and the ball were metal, and that let off heavy metal ions, which destroyed the tissue around the hips. There have been some big pharmaceutical blunders, and some have been blunders and some might have been influenced by profit. I'm not going to make that judgment, but I just don't want us to be in that game. And so there was, just to give an example, cancer of the cervix, of the mouth of the womb. A big study came out about 5 years ago to show that the open approach was better than the laparoscopic or keyhole approach. So we just said, fine, it's a big study, it's significant, it's gained worldwide acceptance. We said, right, our robot won't be used to treat cancer of the neck of the womb or cervical cancer because minimal access. Now, that work will be reproduced and that may change in time, but we go according to what the literature says. And I would hate to make a profit thinking I'd harmed one person or done an operation unnecessarily on a single patient. And we don't need to.
Certainly. So one of the challenges with the mesh issues is that they tried to use a similar material in a lot of different cases. I imagine that translates to robotics trying to build a robot that does all things. Much like you just mentioned, there's cases where it turns out that it's better to do open, so you kind of stepped away from doing those types of procedures. How much have you limited the scope of the application of robotics based on that kind of information?
So we've not really had to. So following the process, we started with the ideal process. So we started with what we thought would be the easiest operations to do. One was a hysterectomy and one was a cholecystectomy because they were single quadrant operations. Therefore, technically, the movement of the arms was less, et cetera, et cetera. Those went well. We then moved to slightly more complex operations, all the time saying, can we do it safely? Does it work well? Do we think it does it better? And when we get down deep in the pelvis, well, it's way better than straight stick because the articulation gives you access. You can dream about the magnification of the picture you get, the direct mapping of the movements, just makes it a joy. And we start to show other areas, pediatric surgery. It's almost a unique selling point for us because our trocars are small. And it just gives good control. And the pediatric surgeons are incredibly excited as we start our program to get that licensed for it. We've also started a program to get it licensed for transoral robotic surgery. Again, a very small space, very tight, very constrained. And we seem to do very, very well in there. We do very well in the abdomen, but the other slightly more restricted space our robot seems to like is the chest. So actually we have, but at every step, we start on a cadaver, we work out, does it look like we can do it safely, efficiently? And then we move into the clinical trial, and before we sort of really go out to all takers. And so far, so good. We've been able to expand to pretty much everything from the the head and neck right down through to the pelvis. And it's a bit, at the moment, we're just replicating what human surgeons would do with handheld instruments and so on. One of the biggest challenges is education and training. And if you look in the literature, one of the areas that that people really think a lot of trouble happens is with poor training. And we've put together a fantastic training program, and we've just changed it now. In that it's now performance-based. So there's a set of criteria you get measured against. So I don't say they're good enough to go. The machine tells them when they are scoring a decent enough point to be considered trained on it. And one of our real excitements is we have a simulator, and which normally meant you had to get the machine and sit and work on it. But we've just had the simulator put in a virtual reality headset. So you'll be able to take it home and sit in your home, in the comfort of your home, with a cup of tea or coffee, and practice on the simulator. But education has been a real challenge as well to get it right. And we've spent a huge amount of money on determining a good, efficient, and effective training program.
And it sounds like you're leveraging a lot of the newer technologies with VR and
yes,
things like that to make sure that you're reaching the surgeons that.
I mean, Arlen, the one thing that you will love is that we've let the robot look at. We've got telemetry movement of the surgeon's hands and the instruments, and we've been looking at the telemetry, and with a 99-point-something% accuracy, the machine can tell the difference between a novice and an expert based on how they move their hands. And that to me is massively exciting, because all of a sudden it opens up the possibility of improving surgery with remote monitoring and machine monitoring and so on, where the machine could actually say, when you pass your needle from the right to the left, you really don't do it particularly well. And it could do with a bit more practice. And then the other really exciting thing is what I call standardization of care. The robot puts an interface between the patient and the surgeon, which was data that was just lost. Now we capture that data, and that means we can actually see a time when we can standardize the surgery, and then we can analyze the steps to see where things could be done better. And surgical outcomes are not good. There are 1 million patients a year that probably die as a result of surgical complications in the world. So we give the coronavirus a fairly good run for its money, and as surgeons, and it is time for us to raise the standard, and I think robotics will be a tool that helps raise the standard markedly.
And that the training and adding things like that certainly play into the strengths of a new generation of surgeons that grew up playing Nintendo and things like that.
Oh,
right?
yeah, and I mean, and they fully. I mean, I have an 11-year-old who picked up one of my headsets the other day, and without any instruction, he had it on. He had switched it on. He'd picked up the handsets, and he'd worked out roughly how to work the controllers in about 5 minutes. So that's a different. Whereas I had to be instructed. That's a different generation. But I just see so much excitement there of marrying tech to it. And, there'll be machine learning that we'll put into it, these pattern recognition, all the digitalization, the huge pools of data that we can capture and collect for analysis. If I think we've got 8,000 cases on my registry, I look forward to when we've got 500,000 cases. And then you do the analysis, and you'll get so many insights into surgery that can only improve it. So I
Absolutely.
think we sit on the cusp of a very exciting time.
Yeah, and with all of that data, there's so many different ways you could go with it. From informing patients that then can go to their surgeon really ask something along the lines of, how did you score on the training, before being, submitting themselves for that surgery, or even, if you have a system that can tell the difference between a novice and an expert, to be able to, really interrupt that input to the output and make that novice have the same kind of outcomes as the expert on the other end, to be able
There was
to
a great study from the United States just been published looking at prostatectomies. And that is on one of the other robotic systems. But what it showed, it didn't necessarily make the expert surgeon a lot better, but it made the less expert surgeon a lot better. So it narrowed the gap between good and bad. Now that to me is, that is good. That just means more patients get good care, because you can't have everybody seeing the top 2%. It's just impossible. So you have to devise a way of making it. And also training we just got early studies. We've been doing some work in Buffalo, in New York, and we've got early studies to show that the length of training and the duration of training to get to competency on a robot is way shorter than on a straight stick laparoscopic set. Acquiring the skills can be done. So that means you can train more surgeons in shorter time and get them to proficiency quicker. That's all good for the health. I mean, wherever you are in the world, cost is a big issue in the health services. We have to find a way of driving down cost.
And that's certainly something that everybody that's developing new devices, whether they're robotic or laparoscopic or even for open surgery, that they're chasing the development time, the cost, all of those things. The increasing technology, is really just putting a larger and larger burden on that development along the way. It certainly sounds like that's something that you've had to manage along the way as well.
I mean, one of my other mantras is value-based medicine. And we've always lived with evidence-based medicine. You've got to do what there is evidence to show is good, but it's got to be value-based as well. And there have been one or two drugs recently produced which are ferociously expensive, and Medicaid and Medicare have actually judged to be too expensive for the gain. And I think we'll see more of this. So one of my responsibilities is to demonstrate that Versius will not only do surgery better, but it will be cost effective. And I think people often say, oh gosh, a robot's way more expensive. But that's just looking at the direct cost of one versus the other. Before you make that statement, you've really got to say, well, how many complications were there? How many people went back to theater? How many people went back to hospital? And when that analysis is done, then actually the robot is now starting to look pretty comfortable and pretty good. So maybe your initial outlay is slightly higher, but your overall cost to the system is considerably lower.
And it's only going to get better.
Yeah, and there's an amazing book written by Angus Dayton, who was the 2015 Nobel laureate for physics, from the United States, and I think he's in Princeton, and he wrote a book called Deaths of Despair, and it's about a health system that's getting too expensive and not necessarily delivering best care. So I think you're going to see in the first world countries quite a big shakeup, where it's going to be not just about outcomes, it's going to be outcomes and the cost of the outcomes. So training is going to be important, good research underpinning what we do, make sure that what we do has got good evidence to support it. And I think, as a company, I'm right behind that.
So moving a little bit away from the clinical impact of this to the development side of things, if there's someone with a clinical background that has an idea or is working with a group of people to develop something new, what sort of advice would you have for them to bring that idea to market?
So that's a great question, and that's a minefield. So I've done one or two other inventions, as I mentioned in the past, and I've also invented operations. But one of my inventions, I was lucky enough to meet a very talented engineer. But I was through the company. So I went to a multinational, said, I have this great idea. And they introduced me to one of the engineers. And he and I developed it. So he did the physical mechanical developing of the instrument, and I did the clinical trials to prove it. But a big company is used to dealing with young entrepreneurial inventors, and your business deal is not always that good. And I certainly didn't make a pile of money out of that one, but I do think the company that bought it from me did. So you need to, one, learn to protect your intellectual property, which is cheap in the beginning, but becomes increasingly expensive with time. And you need to find people you can work with, who you can trust. So I like what you're doing here, because I think we need to have more learning on how to get through the minefield. You know, how do you get a patent early? And it's easy to register a patent in the beginning, but to actually consolidate it becomes altogether more expensive and more tricky. And most people can't afford it. You know, you're going to get investment. You can get the wrong investors and find out that you've got very little skin in the game at the end of it. So there's quite a lot. And fortunately, a lot of universities are starting to develop faculties that help with this. And I think that would be the way that I would probably be most comfortable as a young person. I don't think an individual can easily do it. I think it's too complex, but working with a university, getting the right deal, and yes, you can go to a big company, but make sure you've got somebody smart with you that can negotiate the deal. One of the deals I did was I negotiated a deal for 4% of profit. But of course, the arm of that company was never in profit, because it all goes back to the head office. And I should have done a deal for 4% of sales. So, those are small practical points. It's easily, if you've not done your patent well, for people to go around it. But not everybody in the world is a shark and a crook. And there are lots of people that can help, and lots of people that will give in. I help quite a lot of young entrepreneurs who've got new startup companies. And there's quite a big community, especially here in Cambridge, that sort of helps them and gives advice on where to go. So tricky area, really important. And that's where things can fail. And it's a great shame. I think people often have great ideas that don't make it for that reason.
So connecting with an incubator or something along those lines through a
Correct.
University, absolutely. Yeah. Leveraging people that have been there as much as possible. Sounds
absolutely. So here locally, we've started an investment council in Cambridge. So, and on that are a lot of startup entrepreneurs. There's some academics on it. There's financial people, and the idea being there that you can set up the infrastructure so somebody can get the advice, maybe get some of the money, and get pushed in the right direction, and have people to fall back and ask. The world is littered with 20-something entrepreneurs who've not made any money, and the older you get, the easier the innovations are to make it too. And most people who are successful entrepreneurs in their 50s have failed once or twice before.
Oh, for sure, certainly. So how did you get connected with your co-founders?
So that's actually quite a nice story. So Luke, Paul, and Keith all worked in medtech innovation for companies doing the early stage development, and I had quite a strong both academic reputation and a reputation for having done inventions. So everybody has an assumption that we were put in contact with each other, but in fact, it's quite the opposite. My wife was pregnant and attending antenatal classes, which I didn't attend. And one of the husbands of one of the other women who wasn't as forceful as me, my wife didn't want me there either, I can tell you, being an OBGYN at an antenatal class, he approached my wife and said, "I believe you're a surgeon, and I'm talking about robotics." And she said, "Yeah, I am a surgeon, but the one who's interested in robots is at home. He's mumbling under his breath about robots." So Luke and I had a chance meeting.
Oh, fantastic.
And we met. He came round to my house, and we sat it was supposed to be for half an hour, and 3-4 hours later we were still chatting. And when he left, I said to my wife, "I think he's mad." He says he can do the things I want. And then he would come back and we would talk about what we wanted, do drawings. And then, the others all came in as well. So one of the lucky things, I suppose, is that it's not so lucky in a place like Cambridge, where there really is a significant pool of entrepreneurs walking around and lots going on. And I suspect that had that not happened, Luke and I would have walked into each other at some point anyway, because I was out asking about who's working in robotics, and he was out looking for a surgeon who had, and you're not that many surgeons who've done that much med tech design and development. We're a relatively small band, but increasingly I'm seeing surgeons who are setting out to do that from the very beginning, which is exciting. So I think it's quite a nice story. It's a twist on where people expect it to have come from.
Absolutely. So what's been surprising for you in this entire journey? What's really kind of brought a lesson to you that you didn't expect?
I mean, there've been so many, and there've been many errors as well. I didn't realize how easy it was to spend a large amount of money. We tried to develop certain things ourselves that we just did not have the in-house knowledge and capability of. But fortunately, all of us have been willing to reach out and admit when beaten and get expertise, such as from people like yourself. And we've been good at that, going out and saying, wow, this is proving difficult. Who can help us? Because a robot just about is one of the most complex things you can do. So many systems, all the electrical systems, the mechanical, the AI that goes around it, the computational systems, you name it. I mean, the instruments could not be more tricky. An articulated wristed instrument is a challenge. And if you look at the opposition, I mean, gosh, they took years. And in fact, if you look at straight stick, in the early 90s when I started, gosh, the instruments weren't great. And then I remember at a point where suddenly, the scissors cut and the grasp is grasped. And I think we've had a similar journey. So I think a lot of the complexity, has caught us. But, overcoming all of that, realize it's quite a challenging environment with the opposition. They can play quite a hard game as well. And I think therein we've been quite good. We don't really focus on the opposition. My focus is to build a great product that does a good job and will sell itself. There's a great quote after the Columbia space disaster when Richard Feynman, the Nobel laureate, did the inquiry, which wasn't long because he worked it out in about 5 seconds what was wrong. And then at the end of his report, he had a quote said, public relations are not enough, for nature will never be fooled. And in science, that's the case. And I say to everybody in the company, this is not about writing a script or pretty photographs or anything. You've got to do it well and build it properly. So the number of learnings, I think, we moved incredibly fast in the beginning, from a CGI to first in human in 5 years. But then that next phase to mature your product, I think probably one of the biggest things that we realize is how difficult it is to turn a prototype into a production, piece of equipment, instrument, etc., high volumes, done at an affordable price and working efficiently. And that's a challenge in itself.
There's a big journey between having something that works and something that works all the time in every instance.
almost one of the biggest lessons, but great. I mean, I always make the joke, if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have started. But in truth, it's been an amazing journey. And, for me, one of the privileges has been working with a completely different community. So I'd had a strong academic medical career, mostly around medicine and drugs and operations and so on. And I've now got to work with a group of engineers, and I work with commercial people that are skilled in their own work, marketing people. So the exposure to all these different professions, different levels of expertise, for me, has been an absolute joy. And I miss my clinical work, but I'm never bored coming to work. It's exciting. And, all the time, the data, Alan, we're working on data a lot now. And that's almost exciting me as much as anything. How do we build a bigger registry? How do we, get the data back to the users? How do we use that to leverage better results, better outcomes for patients? And I think Paul, myself, Luke, and the co-founders, our problem is now we've got a million ideas in our head that we want to develop, just no time to do it.
Oh, certainly. Yes. And that set of data is really going to change the landscape of how effective procedures are in the future.
Yes.
Really, like you said early on in this, elevating the least skilled surgeons to the level of the most skilled surgeons in the world, and the impact of that has to be. You say you miss the clinical practice where you're helping individual patients, but here you're helping entire populations of elevating the care that entire countries or the world are going to get out of this. And I imagine that's got to be incredibly inspiring.
That is such a good point. When I was a medical student, I won a prize. And when I was being given the certificate by my professor, he said to me, that's great, you won it, you've done well. And he said, but I'm just telling you that if you practice medicine for the rest of your life, 5 days a week, you will still not save as many lives as the man who sprays DDT on the rivers in Mozambique. And he's true. Public health has an impact. And if we can change the dial and get the impact of minimal access surgery, the uptake to go from, say, 40% to 75%, the number of complications reduced, the number of lives saved is huge. And it will be much more than any of us could have done with our 10 fingers. As a surgeon in theatre. So there is and also another wonderful privilege is going to theatre and watching multiple different surgeons in different specialties working and seeing the skill that they deliver and learning things that I didn't know, because, we all sit in our silos and that cross-pollination and a lot of my interest at the moment is around how do we raise medical standards generally. Better teaching, better governance, data, et cetera, and how do we get the prices down and effective? So yeah, that's sort of almost a byproduct of what we've been doing.
Oh, fantastic! Yes. Well, thank you very much for being on and sharing your story with all of this. The journey has been amazing. I'm always amazed at where Versius is and where it came from, and from the outside, it feels like a very short amount of time, but I'm sure it's been the journey for you. But I really do think that the amount of data generated from this and the technology and how it's applied here, as well as where it's going to go in the future, will really make a huge difference for patients going forward. So thank you very much.
It does, Alan. And one of the other things that I'm now starting to promote is, there are other robotic companies, and I'm trying to find where we have common ground. And not everything has to be, obviously we're here to make a profit, we'd like to be successful, but we also need to find where we can collaborate for the greater good, better patient care, better training, better governance, better monitoring. So that's another potentially very, very exciting area.
Oh, fantastic. So if someone wanted to learn more about Versius or CMR, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Well, we've always been very keen we've always run an intern program. Most of us are still very accessible. We chat to people. A lot of people approach me directly, and as much as possible, we try and answer questions. But we do have an intern program, which people can apply for. We've had to formalize it slightly. We're setting up fellowship programs for slightly more senior surgeons. The intern program is largely for engineers, but we have had 1 or 2 doctors now. And, we're always open for people to come visit us here as well. I'm always excited for people to see what we're doing and to share. Our website is up and there for all to see. And on it, you'll see that we already pushed the publications we've done. We've published a lot of papers now in some pretty big journals. Because again, we want we want this transparency and this dedication to good care and to safety.
Yeah, I think the patient safety priority for you is very evident in everything you guys have been doing. So that's fantastic. So thanks again.
Arlen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for nice to chat to you. It's always great working with you, and I'm always appreciative of the work you've done with us as well in helping refine our product.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure for sure. So thank you very much.
All right then.